Bills tight end Dalton Kincaid could break out over the final month of the NFL season. We'll tell you why on this episode of the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast.
You are Locked On Dynasty Football, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Here are your hosts, Marcus Mosher and Kate Madjuk.
Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. This episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use promo code LockedOnNFL, all lowercase, to win $50 instantly when you play $5. Welcome back. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Kate Madjuk. You can follow her on Twitter at Kate Madjuk. On today's show, we're going to discuss 4 players that could potentially break out over the final month of the season. Because, Kate, every single year, without fail, there's a couple players that'll put together strong, let's call it the fantasy playoff season, right? And that'll artificially move them up in our offseason dynasty rankings or fantasy rankings. So we're just going to get ahead of all that nonsense and talk about some guys that we think that they're going to accomplish that. Let's start with the Bills, because I actually think there's a couple players on the Bills that could go off here in December. I want to start with Dalton Kincaid, who is finally back after missing the last month with a knee injury. Why do you think this is the right time for Kincaid to break out?
Here's the thing. I was doing a deep dive into, Dalton Kincaid. Like, what is going wrong with Dalton Kincaid? Because, like, he does feel like, he's got a relatively steady stream of targets. He's, it just doesn't feel as bad as the lack of ceiling would indicate in fantasy. And I'm trying to find the variances here from last season. He's actually increased his yards per reception average. Actually increased his yards after the catch per reception average tremendously, 4.3 yards after the catch per reception last season. That is up to 6.6 yards after the catch per reception this year. Increase in yards per route run, like pretty good. Like efficiency metrics, like not so bad across the board, actually. Most of his efficiency metrics actually, indicate an improvement from last season, where we've seen a dip, and I think this is one of those variables here that could be a little bit related to health. Not being at 100%, not being at your best, is his catch percentage. 61.8% of his targets have been caught this year. That is in comparison to 80.2% last year. And the big kicker is what percent, and because obviously, like, targets, not all targets are created equal, but he's only catching about 91% of his catchable targets per PFF. That ranks outside of the top 20 for tight ends. Like, he needs to make some improvements there. And I do think that maybe after a 3-game stretch where he's totally been able to rest, get healthy, this could be the boost that maybe we need for Dalton Kincaid to just, if we see some leveling out in terms of that catch rate, I do think we're going to see a much safer floor, but maybe see, more important targets going his way.
I also want to add Keon Coleman in here, because I think Keon Coleman, who's also missed the last, I think, basically a month now with a wrist injury, he's expected to play this week against the Lions. So Kincaid and Coleman back in the lineup, and you're adding those guys with Amari Cooper, Khalil Shakir, Matt Collins, who's made some big plays. It feels like one of those guys will break out. I'm just having a hard time picking which one.
I think my question for you on the Keon Coleman front is why? So, like, obviously there's been he's had a pretty solid season when he's been on the field. We saw definitely some month over month improvement from like September to October. But I think my biggest question is, do you think that, the absence of Keon Coleman smack dab in the middle of his rookie season, is that going to derail anything in terms of his development? We know these reps as a rookie can be pretty critical. So, like, does that missed time hurt him?
Yes, it does. And I think he has a harder time earning targets because obviously he's playing behind Amari, who's clearly established himself as the number one outside receiver. Khalil Shakir has been awesome all season long. And even someone like Mac Hollins has made some big plays in the end zone, in the red zone for the Bills. So I don't think he's going away. Whereas Kincaid, he just is a completely different player than Dawson Knox. And I do think once Kincaid is back in the field, he's going to go right back to being in that role of the receiving tight end. It's just how many targets will he get? I just think in some of these high scoring games, like this week against the Lions with a point total of 52, this might be the game that he gets 7 or 8, maybe even 9 targets. And that gets us all excited again for 2025.
Yeah, and let's look at the upcoming schedule here. You mentioned Detroit Lions on deck for this week. Then you've got the Patriots, the Jets, who have not been the same defense that we once saw here. Again, to close out the year, New England Patriots. So, like, 2 matchups with the Patriots who aren't doing a ton. The New York Jets not doing a ton. Like, the
Buffalo should
schedule,
score 30 points in every game they play the rest of the year.
absolutely. And that should mean plenty of, as long as game script doesn't get too far out of hand. That's my biggest concern, maybe in terms of like passing volume. Is this going to be one of those things where they run up the score so quickly that they just don't need to play a ton? We saw
But if
that.
they're running up the score, there's just a chance that those are the guys running up the score as well.
Hopefully.
I just want to point out, we saw this happen. Now I got to try to remember what playoffs it was. The 2021 playoffs, where Gabe Davis scored 4 touchdowns in the AFC Championship game, or the divisional round. Excuse me, the divisional round. And all of a sudden, in redraft leagues, he was a 4th round pick. I remember going to the Fantasy Football Expo the next year, and he got drafted in the 3rd round in one of the leagues. So we will see a couple players over the next month and into the actual NFL playoffs change their fantasy and dynasty value. And I wouldn't be surprised if it's Kincaid or Coleman Kate.
And if that is the case, so let's say our prediction comes true, are you buying into it as the real deal breakout for either?
I mean, you know how much I love Dalton Kincaid, so I don't know. I know I'm biased here. I think I would want to see like 3 of the 4 games to be pretty strong for Kincaid before I dive all the way back in. As for Coleman, I think if he can have 1, maybe 2 games where he shows the upside, I think I maybe could get into it, because Amari Cooper is a free agent after the year, as is Mac Hollins, as is Curtis Samuel. Maybe they just roll with Keon Coleman and Khalil Shakir and Dalton Kincaid as their primary weapons next year. So I actually think if Coleman can put together a couple games, I would be more excited about his long-term outlook than Kincaid.
Interesting. And, I think, like, again, both of these guys, value's a little bit suppressed right now. So if you are a believer in the rest of season breakout, if you think we're going to see strong performances, this is the time, I think, to trade for these guys.
Absolutely. All right, let's talk about a quarterback that we could see breaking out over the final 4 games of the NFL season. Let's talk about Anthony Richardson next. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL, all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That is FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. This episode is brought to you by Game Time. I absolutely love Game Time. It is the only ticketing app that I use when I want to go see my favorite teams play. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only the incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste your time searching through thousands of tickets. There's so many great features on the Game Time app. One of my favorites is you can get a panoramic view of your seats before you buy. I like to sit in the end zone. I like to be right down the middle of the goalpost a little bit so I can see the whole thing. They also have all-in pricing. You can toggle this feature to show the total upfront, so there's no surprises at checkout. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. We are discussing 4 players that we think could break out over the final 4 games of the NFL season. Okay, let's talk about Anthony Richardson, whose value has shifted maybe more than any other player in Dynasty leagues this year. He was up to a top 8 quarterback to start the year. Then he was down outside the top 20. Now that he's back into the starting lineup, could you see him breaking out soon?
I could. And a little bit of this is also just due to the health of his weapons. We know Josh Downs, second-year wide receiver, has had his bumps and bruises just kind of continuously this season. They're coming off a bye. You also have Michael Pittman Jr., who has been dealing with a painful back injury. Remember, there was a time where we thought that he was going on IR, and yep. I don't know how we backpedaled that, but he's been playing through it. And I do think that generally speaking, if health is an issue for your team, a bye week is going to do you some good. Now, obviously, that's just one component of the Anthony Richardson experience, but coming off the bye, I don't think we're going to have a great, upcoming week. We got the Denver Broncos in Denver, but to close out there, you got the Titans, Giants, and Jaguars, and I could picture Anthony Richardson piecing together some pretty solid games here, and I could imagine for how in the dynasty community was on Anthony Richardson just a couple of months ago. I mean, there were people that were valuing him inside the top 3, top 5. Like, I could picture people getting sucked back into the Anthony Richardson machine.
So there are a couple different ways that I could see this going where he increases his dynasty value. Let's just do the most obvious. These are 3 really bad defenses he's going to be playing. He just posts big numbers, right? And if he has 3 big games out of 4, I think people would be really excited. I also think there's another world, okay, where he doesn't post big numbers, but the Colts win all 4 of these games and they make the postseason, and now they're in the playoffs with Anthony Richardson as their starting quarterback. And that's how people get back in. Hey, he got them, into the postseason. This team was not very good. They won, I think would be 6 of the last 7 starts with Anthony Richardson. He's on the right track. So I do see some different paths to how this could be good for Anthony Richardson and his dynasty value.
Okay. Counterpoint here. Let's say Anthony, I think actually the best case scenario for Anthony Richardson's dynasty value and the upward trajectory that maybe we're predicting right now is if he doesn't make the playoffs, right? Like maybe they get that close, right? They get that close. But if you have a circumstance where, let's say they eke in as, the 7th seed.
Yeah.
And they're going to Buffalo to play the Buffalo Bills, currently slated in as the number 2 seed in the wild card round. I think that would be a huge problem for Anthony Richardson. And I think the Buffalo Bills defense generally, can I
give you an alternative one? What okay, let's say they're the 7th seed and they play the Pittsburgh Steelers. Who Anthony
You really
Richardson,
think that's going to be any better? Because I generally have been of the belief that if Anthony Richardson had played through the full game with the Pittsburgh Steelers and Joe Flacco hadn't come in, I think the Steelers probably would have walked away with a win.
Maybe, but he played really well at the start of that game. He led 2 touchdown drives to start the game.
I agree, but also his biggest weakness, turnovers.
I know.
Yeah.
Again, these are all. This is all hypothetical, by the way. I think the Colts lose both those games, just to be clear. But at least we know with Shane Steichen that he has a history of beating Pittsburgh. But that doesn't even matter. I do think this sets up well and lines up well for Richardson to go on a little bit of a run. And honestly, Kate, I don't think he needs to do a ton for fantasy managers to jump back in. Like if he can just complete 55% of his passes, don't turn the ball over, get a couple rushing touchdowns, and just be the starting quarterback for the Colts in 2025, I honestly think that's a massive win. And I think that's very possible over these next 4 games.
So would that be intriguing for you to buy back into his dynasty value? Because I feel like we were actually probably 2 of the analysts that were like most on the fence when it comes to Anthony Richardson, just from like a long-term perspective, concerns about, the consistency in the passing game, maybe the lack of experience, etc. The health has been a concern. Right now, he's down to QB 20, which I think is.
See, I could buy into that. Like
Yeah.
we just were out as a top 10 quarterback. But again, if I have to pay QB 16 prices, and again, assuming that he plays fairly well over the next month, I think I would be back in. I would be willing to give up some draft capital or some quarterbacks of similar capabilities to do that. So that's why I think I think the most important thing you want to see here is enough from Richardson that he is the clear-cut starter in 2025. If we just come out of week 18 saying, okay, yeah, he's their starter next year, like we're doing with Bryce Young and the Panthers right now, I think that's a massive win.
Yeah, you just want him to not be benched. Like that's kind of the goal, because you do know that even if Anthony Richardson is playing bad, he's still like, even in the worst of games from a tape perspective, Anthony Richardson can still post some pretty solid fantasy days. I want to give you a couple of quick examples here of some trades that have gone down recently on Dynasty League Football. Justin Herbert for Anthony Richardson and a first-round pick.
Ooh. Yeah, I think I'd take the Richardson side there.
Anthony Richardson for a first.
I'm assuming this is a super flex league.
Yes.
Yeah, I'll take Richardson because Richardson is just more talented than any quarterback in this year's draft.
Anthony Richardson, a second and a fourth for a 2025 first and third.
Yeah. Again, assuming these are super flex, I would take Richardson. And that just shows you how suppressed his value is right now. Again, I think he doesn't even have to play all that well, but if the Colts can be somewhat effective and get to 9 or 10 wins and Richardson is the clear starter next year, you're not going to be able to get him for anywhere near those prices, Kate. Not anywhere close.
Yeah, I think you're spot on there.
All right, let's talk about a running back that we think could see a massive uptick in his dynasty value. Let's talk about Blake Corum next. This episode is brought to you by Built Rewards. If you're a renter, listen up. This is a total game changer. Thanks to Built, you can now earn points on rent payments, just like you do when you go to get groceries or travel. Paying rent now comes with serious perks, and it's completely free to join. Earn valuable Built points on your rent and everyday spending at no extra cost. Redeem points for flights, hotel stays, and even future rent payments with over 500 airlines and 700,000 hotels in their program. The possibilities are endless. Access unique experiences that are exclusive to Built members. It's an absolutely fantastic program. Start earning points right now on your rent when you're paying by going to joinbuilt.com/LockedOnNFL. That is joinbuilt.com/LockedOnNFL. And make sure to use our link so they know that we sent you. Don't wait. Start earning rewards today. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. Everydayers, we'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. I'm really thankful that I'm not getting yelled at by Kate and Matt for asking too much for Saquon Barkley if you missed yesterday's show. But we want to tell you about our the new Locked On NFL show. 2 shows every single day. 1 in the morning with Tyler Rowland, 1 in the afternoon with Tony Wiggins. They cover the Titans and the Jags. Feel bad for those guys, but at least they get to talk about the rest of the NFL that is available wherever you get your podcast. All right, Kate, let's talk about Blake Corum, who, I mean, there was a couple of weeks he just didn't even play a snap. He is starting to get a little bit more work in this backfield, at least 8 carries in back-to-back games. Why could he be somebody that breaks out over the final month of the season?
Well, I mean, this is honestly kind of great timing because the Rams play the Niners on Thursday Night Football this week. So, like, this take could come to fruition, I think, sooner than we think. Obviously, there was
Yeah.
a ton of concern about Blake Corum taking over the backfield when it comes to Kyron Williams, or even at least like eating into that backfield a little bit more consistently. Did not happen. Remember, Kyron Williams listed as the punt returner, and everybody had a absolute meltdown, conniption about the long-term implications of that. Well, if they walk out of this building tonight and lose, what is their chance of making the playoffs?
It's under 25%. It's
So
pretty unlikely. And if Seattle were to happen to win this week, I believe they play Green Bay, it's down to like a 5% chance.
yeah, and I think that could be the kicker here when it comes to Blake Corum and figuring out like, keeping Kyron Williams healthy. If they're not gearing toward the postseason, do we not just want to preserve his body? Because obviously he has taken on a monstrous workload this season. He has taken on most of those carries. Like, I have to wonder if this isn't going to be a circumstance where they're like, let's keep Kyron fresh. Let's keep him healthy. Let's not risk another ankle injury, another foot injury, what have you. Let's see what we got in Blake Corum. And maybe we can design this game plan a little bit differently heading into 2025.
So we see this happen every year, Kate. There is always a running back or two that basically does nothing in the first 3 months of the season. And then they put together not even a full game, but a couple splash plays that get us excited. And we see their dynasty value jump. I think a perfect
Samir
example.
White last year.
Again, perfect example. Now, that one didn't work out, right?
Mhm.
But Zamir White started the final 4 games of the season, and all of a sudden people were completely in on him. I'll give you another example. Chase Brown last year did not have a single game of over 65 rushing yards. He had 2 total carries in the first 3 months of the season, but he had a couple big plays later in the year, and now his ADP was tied with Zach Moss for most of the offseason, and now Chase Brown is a top 15 running back. Like, this happens, and it really happens a lot of times with these rookies. So don't be discouraged because Blake Corum hasn't had a big game yet. All it's going to take is honestly one play. Like, if Blake Corum has a 40-yard rushing touchdown, you're going to see his ADP jump way up. And I think if the Rams get eliminated from the playoffs, or their odds are under 10%, maybe that's when you'll see Sean McVay say, hey, Kyron, we don't need to give you 60 extra touches over the final 3 weeks of the season. Let's let Blake Corum handle some of that workload. This is a big opportunity for him.
Huge opportunity. And again, coming out of Michigan, we know that, I mean, he was one of the most productive running backs in all of college football. I mean, the stats speak for themselves. 22 rushing touchdowns. Honestly, kind of built in the same vein as Kyron Williams is a little bit.
Sure.
Like, can be a total bruiser, has a nose for the end zone. I think Blake Corum, like, if you give him touches, if you build it, he will come. If you give Blake Corum touches, he will
Yep.
produce. I think it's just about finding the right opportunity. And again, like, we'll see this a lot when it comes to teams that have been eliminated from playoff contention, where they, and again, obviously not saying that's the case just yet, but the Rams in a competitive division, it's looking less likely here. And when that is the case, we'll see teams kind of shift their philosophy a little bit. They want to know what they have on the remainder
Yeah.
of their rosters heading into the coming season. They want to know, do we need to prioritize depth at running back? Do we need, like, how do we need to approach this offseason? A lot of that is getting a look at the players deep down in their roster. They already know Kyron Williams. They know Cooper Kupp. They know Puka Nacua. They need to get a look at the rest of the guys and get a feel for what they could bring in the season to come. This could be the opportunity.
I'm going to use Chase Brown again. Going into this point of the season last year, Chase Brown had 13 yards from scrimmage. 13 yards. He had a game against the Colts during the same exact week, 3 catches for 80 yards and a touchdown. And over the couple final games of the season, including the last game against Cleveland, He got 11 carries, which is the most that he got in any game last year. And he kind of started to work himself into a position where he could be part of one of the best offenses in the league. And now you're seeing what could happen this year. We know this Rams offense is going to be good with Sean McVay and Matt Stafford. If Blake Corum can string together even a couple plays to get us excited, don't be surprised if his fantasy value increases. That is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Dynasty Football your first listen of the day. Check out our show wherever you get your podcasts. We are free and available on all platforms. Follow Kate on Twitter at Kate Majuk. I'm at Marcus _Mosher, and we will see you right back here tomorrow.